Hello, welcome to ASM Live from Microbe 2017 in New Orleans. I am Melanie Armstrong, Chair of the Center for the History of Microbiology and ASM Archives Committee, and today we will be discussing early African American microbiologists making contributions, overcoming barriers. If you have any questions and you are in the audience, please raise your hand for the microphone. If you are online, please ask your questions in the Facebook comment thread. Now let me introduce our guest, Dr. Marion Johnson-Thompson. Dr. Johnson-Thompson is Professor Emerita of Biology at the University of the District of Columbia. She is Adjunct Professor in the School of Public Health at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and until 2008, she was Director of Education and Biomedical Research Development at the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. She has been an ASM member since 1971. She is a cancer researcher, microbiologist, and educator, as well as a leader in many professional and civic organizations. We are pleased to have her with us today to talk about her work addressing science equity and social justice, particularly as it relates to the history of Black microbiologists in the United States and within our own organization. Thank you for being here, Dr. Johnson-Thompson. Perhaps you can begin by telling us why and how you began your historical research on early African American microbiologists.
Sure, I'd be happy to, but first let me thank the organizers for inviting me to participate in this. So the way I got interested in this is that when I started teaching microbiology at a predominantly African American school, I wanted to tell my students about microbiologists who had come before them in order to expand the number of role models that they knew. But it was very difficult for me to do this because I really had not been exposed to Black microbiologists. When I did my undergraduate work, my microbiology teacher was a white male. And then when I worked on my master's degree at the time, my mentor was an Asian male. So I started going to the library, and of course it was very difficult then. You couldn't get on the internet. You can get on the internet now and find out anything. But it took a walk to the library and a search. And I began to find some information. And then I thought, as some of us academics do, let me get my students involved. And so I decided that during Black History Month, I would give extra credit to students who would do a one-pager on a Black microbiologist who had made a contribution and also give a very brief oral report. And so I got quite a number of submissions, but one that really intrigued me was the one on William Augustus Hinton, who I'd never heard before. In brief, William Augustus Hinton received the MD degree in 1912 from Harvard University. And because of racism, he was not allowed to do an internship at a hospital in Boston. So what he did for the first year was he volunteered in the syphilis laboratory. He volunteered with no pay in the morning, and he had a minor paying job in the evening. But almost from the beginning, he began to make really outstanding contributions. He developed a Hinton, what was known then as a Hinton test, the Hinton flocculation test for the identification of syphilis. And it became known as the most rapid and sensitive test at that time. But in addition to his contributions, especially in times back then, I was also intrigued because he had left a scholarship at Harvard University titled the Eisenhower Scholarship. And apparently, when he passed in 1959, this amount was $75,000. So you can imagine how much that was in terms of today's figures.
Impressive, an incredible story.
Yes.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit about other figures that you have encountered in your history studies.
Yes, I also encountered another individual who was really very close in proximity to me, and that was Dr. Ruth Moore, who received her PhD in bacteriology from Ohio State University in 1933. And she's credited as the first African American, and in particular female, to receive the PhD in bacteriology. She spent the bulk of her career, or all of her career I should say, at Howard University in the medical school, where she played a significant role in developing the microbiology program. Dr. Moore was very interesting. I had a chance to meet her before she passed. In fact, at the 1986 ASM meeting, the Minority Committee invited her, and she gave her an award. Now, I must go back to Hinton because the records show that Ruth Moore attended quite a few meetings in the 1930s and 1940s. However, Hinton didn't. But it turns out that in the earliest records of the ASM, Hinton was a dues-paying member in 1921, but he never attended an ASM meeting. And it turns out that he did not want to attend because he felt that if people knew that he was black, that they wouldn't accept his work. And this led to my discovery that he led a life as a hidden figure. But this time, he led that life because he really didn't feel that his work would be accepted. And he really made a lot of contributions. He also wrote a textbook of microbiology, a textbook of syphilis that was used around the country and apparently external to the U.S. Now, the book, I've had a chance to look at the book. He did receive mixed reviews, even though it was outstanding, an outstanding task for an African American in 1936 to write a textbook. But the issue is he was also offered the Spingarn Medal by the NAACP, and it's the highest recognition that the NAACP gives to an African American per year, but he refused it. And he says he refused it because he didn't feel that he deserved the recognition. But in truth, and as his daughter, who I had a chance to meet, said, he really didn't want people to know that he was African American. And so you really have to kind of understand the times back then. And it appears as though at Harvard University, he was really protected by a group of eminent microbiologists that included people like Zinser, if you know Zinser microbiology, as well as several other Nobel laureates who actually wrote his memorial minute.
Interesting.
Yes. Now, I can tell you about a couple of other individuals. William Augustus Poindexter. Poindexter was another figure, and I found him very interesting because he also went to Harvard, where he received the MD in 1929, I believe. But unlike Hinton, Poindexter really came out, showed himself. He made significant contributions. He was the only person to serve as a parasitologist under General Douglas MacArthur in the South Pacific during World War II. But in addition to Ruth Moore, he also worked at Howard University and was very instrumental in developing the microbiology lab there. In fact, he hired Ruth Moore. Charles Buggs, another microbiologist who received his PhD in the 1940s. And while Poindexter and Ruth Moore went to Howard University, Charles Buggs was the only African American, I should say the first African American at that time to receive tenure and be promoted to professor at a white institution, and that was at Wayne State University. He later served at the University of Southern California and the University of California at, University at Long Beach.
One of those.
Long Beach. And actually, I also had a chance to meet him. So those are just some of the early pioneers that paved their way. Now, Poindexter received a lot of accolades from both the minority community as well as the majority community, and he was well appreciated. And from his autobiography, he led a really wonderful and self-fulfilling life. Unlike Hinton, who later said after his retirement, in fact, he served as an instructor at Harvard all those years, and it wasn't until 1 year before he retired that Harvard named him assistant clinical professor. But he lived with a lot of ambiguities. In fact, he said that he thought that he shouldn't be recognized for his work by any special mechanism, but that if he worked hard, he would rise to the top. However, before he died, he actually started communicating with minority professionals and said that he had made a mistake on that account. And he really began to feel that he was not treated equally. However, he really wanted to be accepted. And according to his daughter, Jane Hinton, and according to all the records, he wanted to be accepted so badly that he left his 2 daughters out of his will, except for $1,000 each, and he left the rest of it for Harvard University.
Interesting. So do you have a favorite compelling story that you've encountered in your studies or learning more about these individuals?
Well, I think that's a compelling story, the Hinton story. But I tell you something else that I noted. Dr. Hinton was a consultant to the United States Public Health Service. And I really believe that he probably had some involvement with the Tuskegee study. He was a top syphilis person during that time. And so if my years allow me, I do plan to go down to CDC and look up the records. I have talked to the person, in fact, I know him very well, who broke the story of the Tuskegee study back in the 70s, Bill Jenkins, who at the time was working at the CDC. And he's told me that the records will probably show that, and that because that's how he found out what he found, by going through the records. So that was pretty compelling. The other compelling story relates to a person who was not designated as a microbiologist. He was a physician and dermatologist who became a multi-millionaire in Chicago. His name was T.K. Lawless. He received his MD degree from Northwestern University, but early on he went to Dillard University to get his undergraduate degree. T.K. Lawless left, at the time of his death, he left $650,000 to Jewish causes. And the records show that he actually developed a wing, a dermatology wing in Tel Aviv. And at the time, he was very friendly with, I think it was Rabin, Prime Minister. And he actually, he developed a summer camp for Jewish boys in Tel Aviv as well, and made many other contributions to Jewish causes. And when asked why he did that, he said it was because when he went to Chicago and he wanted to be on the faculty of Northwestern University and also go to the Pasteur Institute, that 11 of the recommendations that he received were from Jewish professionals. And he also said that when he was growing up, there was a Jewish peddler. He grew up in Louisiana, New Orleans. Right? He was from Thibodaux, New Orleans, but he grew up here. And he said that this peddler was very kind to him and his family. Now, the other piece of that is that his father was a congregational minister, and his father was very involved in the development of Dillard University. And so I happened to be in touch with a family member who told me that he had told he was never married, but he had told the children in the family that he had left money at Dillard University. So if they ever wanted to go to school there would be funds. But when the first person went, they were told that Dr. Lawless had only left $100 and there was no money. So I just found that very, very interesting. He also was on the board of trustees at several black colleges, including Howard University. So one of the things I'd like to find out is whether or not he gave those colleges money as well. So I just found those two items very interesting. One other quick one is that we've done a listing of the first 10 blacks to receive PhDs in microbiology. And one of them was Frederick Patterson, who was the third African American to receive he actually received a DVM in bacteriology from Cornell. And he spent most of his career as president of Tuskegee University. But the significant thing about him, and I found this out when I went to Tuskegee and was looking through the records about him, is that he was the founder of the United Negro College Fund.
Interesting stories.
Yes.
And again, we do invite questions from the audience. If you have questions, just raise your hand. We'll get you a microphone. Or if you're online, please type them into the comment bar and we will get those comments for you.
There's a question.
You had mentioned that Dr. Hinton could not do an internship. It was 1911 or 1912?
1912.
12. Yeah. When did that change?
In fact, I did see recently, it changed around 1940. And I can't remember who the person was, but they were able to finally do that. Now, the thing about it is that he couldn't do an internship in Boston, but other physicians who had graduated from Harvard after him, they went other places. And one such person was Dr. Lewis Wright, who went to Howard University, and he became a well-established investigator. So, yeah.
I partly remember the story about Mueller Hinton,
Okay.
but that's Hinton's daughter?
Right. So very early on, and I just have to say something about James J., who was my mentor, who actually led the effort here in ASM to get black microbiologists very involved. He started looking at this history. In fact, he wrote an early book back in the 60s on black scientists from 1867 to 1968, and he chronicled them. So with this, in addition to the fact, and I found this out after he passed, he never told me, but there's an autobiography of Poindexter by Bellum Publishing Company. And Dr. J gave me a copy of it, and he gave me a copy of some other books on blacks that were published by Bellum Publishing Company in Detroit. And actually, he was the publisher. He never told me that. And I imagine that he would say nobody would have published Poindexter's autobiography. So he put the bill to do that as well as for others. Now, getting back to your question about Jane Hinton, back in the day, Jim, Jay, and I and several others thought Mueller-Hinton agar was for William Hinton, but it wasn't, as you pointed out. His daughter, he had two daughters. One ended up being a veterinary microbiologist, and she worked in the lab of Mueller at Harvard during the summers, and that's how that happened. So, and of course, when I met her, and she says, well, I really didn't do that much. So you can see they were very modest people, and I imagine that Hinton promoted that. The other thing about Hinton in his inadequacies, as I would say, he sent his daughters to school in England with a governess. He was very interested in trying to be white. So whatever his colleagues did, he wanted to do it too. But his daughter Jane says it was a very miserable time growing up because he had this way that he wanted them to appear. The second daughter was married, and she ended up dying in a mental institution. So it's a very, very sad situation. The other connection that I have about this family is that when I relocated to Durham, North Carolina in 1992, I met a Dr. Charles Watts. I met him because he was a graduate of Howard University, so I met him in the alumni club. I was telling him about William Hinton. He told me that William Hinton was his uncle. So William Hinton actually married his mother's sister. So he was able to give me some other personal information about William Hinton, including the fact that Hinton had promised him that he would be able to get him into Harvard Medical School. And he went to Harvard for the interview, but he wasn't accepted. So this was another way that, Hinton really felt that he just could not make the go of it, in terms of how white people perceived him.
It's interesting as you characterize the field, it seems like these microbiologists responded in very different ways to the challenges that they faced, right? And sort of keeping with the theme of this session, are there particular characteristics that you would ascribe to the experience of early Black microbiologists, the challenges that they faced and the successes they had?
Well, one of the things that intrigues me about them, and I can also look back in my growing up, is that during that time, racism in a way was accepted. You knew your place, and you just continued to work doing what you could without offending people. So, you knew you couldn't go into a bathroom, you didn't try to go, right? You knew you couldn't go into eating establishments, you didn't try to go. Now, Ruth Moore attended her first ASM meeting, as she says, in 1932. And back in those days, they could attend the meetings, but they couldn't eat in the restaurants in the city. They couldn't stay in the hotels. And she talks about the meeting that she went to in 1956, I believe, the 50th anniversary of ASM. And it was in Baltimore, Maryland. And she and her colleagues actually commuted every day because there was no place for them to stay and they had to take their lunch. Okay, so it was another good example. One of my colleagues at the University of the District of Columbia when I started working there was Dr. Aqua Webb. He was the fourth Black to get a PhD in microbiology. Dr. Webb was a very bitter man as well, but he told me stories of when he was at the University of Illinois. There were some lectures that the professors would not allow him to come into the class. He'd have to stand on the outside of the door and take his notes. And he never had the benefit of a lab partner. So can you imagine the young people here that are microbiologists? Can you imagine today accepting that? No. But that was the way of life in that time. So and I just wonder, the thing that really intrigues me about all of this is just think if these people had had the opportunities and the resources. If they made such great contributions, how much more they could have made had there been more of an equalizing environment.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I saw another question over here.
You'd mentioned Dr. Lawless practiced dermatology in Chicago,
yes,
right?
Yes.
I'm just wondering, was his practice diverse in terms of ethnicity, or was it primarily Black?
Interesting question. Primarily Black. in a low-income black neighborhood. That's where he made his money.
How did he make so much money then?
Well, okay, I forgot to tell you something else. He was president of a bank, and he's also head of an insurance company. He became a multi-million dollar.
He made his money not from practicing dermatology.
Probably
then.
so.
I'm so happy to learn that he was acceptable as a banker, as president and all that, but not acceptable in the field of science. And I just wonder how come, this population was so, accepting the situation. Why the aggression? I feel like the evolution now, that people, when they hear something discriminatory, they resent and they,
because
talk about it. Why didn't they talk that the gene? See, all of us have the gene to respond to all kind of discrimination. How come the genes at that time were so suppressed and now they are not?
Okay, I can answer that
evolutionary process. Huh?
I can answer that question very well. The system today says equality. So the young people growing up today hear equality. Everything is supposed to be equal. The system back then said you were not equal. Segregation was the rule of the land. I went to segregated schools.
My question
is,
why
no
did
choice.
they accept it?
You had no choice. You really had no choice. I mean, that's the law of the land. I mean, it seems unbelievable now. I went to a segregated school. I received old books that the white students had used. I would pass by playgrounds and knew that I couldn't go in. I never asked, Mom, why can't I go to that playground? We would go on road trips, and we had to stop by the side of the road to use the bathroom. We had to take our lunch. My father was a physician, but he was black. That was the way life was during those times. So I've had the opportunity to live in both, to see the old and see what's happening now, as well as see what appears to be reversing in many instances.
We have just a few minutes left, but I wonder if you could wrap up by sort of sharing with us what this study has done for your own experience as a microbiologist, how it has influenced you personally or professionally.
Okay, personally and professionally, I really feel a sense of pride and a sense of accomplishment in terms of finding out all of this information and sharing it with so many individuals. I am particularly grateful to ASM in the sense that when I went to ASM years ago with the idea about Hinton, when I brought that information up and said that Hinton should be recognized, ASM leadership accepted that, and we now have a Hinton Award. Okay? Just the mere fact that I've found these individuals, I've been able to share them with students. It's given students a sense of pride, as well as role models. And as I often say, my goodness, these people accomplished with so many barriers. A lot of those barriers have been broken. So we're just hoping that many more of you, of our young people, can do the same.
Thank you so much. And I do encourage you, Dr. Johnson Thompson has written about these individuals for ASM publications in the past and continues to write on them. So do look them up and learn a little bit more about this history and the story that these people have to tell. So thank you very much for joining us. You've been watching early African American microbiologists making contributions, overcoming barriers. I'd like to thank Dr. Marion Johnson Thompson for sharing her insights with us today, and thank those of you who are joining us online and in person for your time. Please stay tuned for more great programming from ASM Live at Microbe 2017 in New Orleans. Thank you.
Thank you.
They tell you to put your chin right there.
I became an ASM member in 1981.
95?
Since 2008.
I joined ASM in 1974.
I've been an ASM member for 41 years.
I first became a member in 1989.
Seems like all my career.
I'm willing to bet it's a decade.
My first ASM was 1993. I still have a picture of me holding the program open, sitting on the hotel room bed, really excited because for the first time ever I saw my name in print associated with microbiology.
When I was a graduate student at Purdue in 1980, it was the thing. I mean, if you were going to be a microbiologist, you joined the ASM. It was just really that simple.
ASM is very special to me because I became a member in 2002, and when I first attended the meeting at Salt Lake City, Utah, I met my PhD thesis mentor, Dr. Arturo Casadevall. And so ASM kind of introduced me to the PhD world.
Definitely the most important thing is that ASM has provided me with a graduate fellowship. So they've helped support me during my graduate training. In addition, I've gotten a lot of networking opportunities and I've met a lot of really great people through ASM.
And we can share our work and connect, and they can teach me things that I don't know and I can teach them things that they don't know. And just that partnership and working together, that's what scientists do, to share your work. And it's the most exciting thing to learn about new projects.
ASM has actually done a whole lot of work and given me the kind of exposure I wouldn't have had if I'm not a member of ASM.
Many brains are better than one.
Great thing. It's a really member-driven organization. I love that. I've always loved that.
The bigger the better, the more the merrier.
You want to do microbiology, become a member.